Good to be together again this evening and studying God's Word together. We do have visitors. We want you to know that you're welcome. We hope that you're able to join in worship and enjoy studying and praising God together. We're going to be in Judges chapter 13 tonight. So if you want to get your Bibles out and follow along as we study through a story about Samson, understanding who Samson was and his life. We've been working our way through different Bible characters to get a sense of who they are and what we learn about God and his plan and how he's working, and what we learn about ourselves as we study these different men and women throughout the Old Testament. Some are good, some are bad, but most are both good and bad. So we have that as we study through these different stories. You know, a lot of times, whenever we think about heroes or deliverers, we think about really strong people. Strength impresses us. Strength is a big deal to us, and we like for people who are leading us to be strong, or to have qualities that set them above everyone else of leadership or some kind of talents or abilities. We tend to look up to those people. We tend to amplify them, make them bigger than life, so that we can draw from them the strength that they seem to have. And also because we feel safe having someone who is leading us who is strong and able to defeat enemies or protect us from any kind of dangers or things like that. So as we study the Bible, it's interesting that we see men constantly elevating those who are stronger. Saul, if you remember, is head and shoulders above everybody else. And Samuel, whenever he's going to select the next king after Saul, looks at Eliab, David's oldest brother, and says, "Surely this is the king." We look at strength and we think, man, this must be a great guy. And this guy has it all put together because of how strong and big and beautiful he may be. But the story of Samson forces us to question that assumption a little bit, and maybe think a little bit deeper than surface level whenever we think about strength, and maybe not exalt those who are physically strong or physically beautiful or physically capable in some way, as much as perhaps we might be tempted to. The same goes with all of the latest judges. We've looked at all the judges in the book of Judges except for Samson. We're going to have Eli and Samuel, who are also going to be judges that we'll look at in the book of Samuel. But this is the last of the book of Judges. And Gideon, though he was a man of faith and with 300 went out and defeated 135,000, he lifted up that golden ephod. He made mistakes. He didn't make himself king, but his son was the son of the king, Abimelech. So he had flaws, he had errors. Jephthah also had errors. Samson, as we're going to study, has errors and makes mistakes, even though he's so strong. Samson appears to be the strongest man in all of the Bible, perhaps the strongest man to have ever lived. We don't know that. There's no way to test that, but he does appear to be extremely strong. But the story of Samson begins very similar to other deliverers, and then it goes in a different direction, like some of the recent judges have. It says in verse 1 of chapter 13, "And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. Again, the people have sinned, and again, the God who has provided for them and protected them provides judgment. He brings an opposing nation against them, as he promised he would do." Remember, this was all part of the Mosaic covenant. God said, if you'll serve me alone and follow my commandments, then I will take care of you. You will live in the land of prosperity, and you'll have nothing to fear. But the people have constantly failed to do that. And so God brings judgment against them. Nation after nation has risen up against God's people and oppressed them. And then time and time again, they've cried out to God in repentance, asking for salvation, and God has delivered them. Last time, as we saw with Jephthah, God said, "I'm done. I'm not doing it anymore." And then he got tired of seeing them suffer, and so he brought in Jephthah. and allowed the people to be saved. Well, this time, it's interesting. The people are sold into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. And then the next thing we read is not, they cried out to the Lord. In fact, we don't read that in the story of Samson. The people never seem to cry out to the Lord. Instead, what we see is God responding and God acting. God promises a child to a barren woman. A man by the name of Manoah is in the land of the Danites. He's a Danite, and he is married to a woman who has no children, and she's barren. And we think, well, that's happened before. That reminds us of Abraham. The promises God made to Abraham that he would have a son, and Isaac was born. And then God brought a son, two sons, to Isaac after Rebekah was barren. And then he brought a son to Rachel after she was barren. So there's this lineage of barren women being blessed with a man who's going to be given all the promises that have been handed down. Well, here we have another one of those. A man of the Danites was promised that his barren wife would have a son, and she's told, you're to take this son and to make him a Nazirite. In fact, while he's still in your womb, don't drink any wine or anything from the fruit of the vine at all. And whenever he's born, and nothing unclean, and whenever he's born, you are not to cut his hair. He will be a Nazirite all of his days. And so Manoah hears this and is excited, and he wants to know the man's name, the man of God, and he ends up offering a burnt offering sacrifice to the man after he doesn't tell him what his name was. And then the man disappears into the flame that's the burnt offering and goes up into heaven, and he realizes he has seen God. The angel of God has been in his presence. And he and his wife prepare for Samson, whose name means strength, by the way. And they prepare for him, and they follow the commands of the angel, and they don't eat anything. She doesn't eat anything unclean, doesn't touch the fruit of the vine. They don't cut his hair, and Samson is going to be a Nazirite, and God is working to deliver Israel through him. But what's interesting about Samson is not just the fact that God brings him in out of nowhere. The people don't cry for him, and he doesn't just select a man who's already born, but he gets him from birth. Beyond that, whenever we see Samson grow up, his whole life is just kind of confusing. I mean, he's a Ninevite. I mean, he's a Nazarene. He's a Nazirite. I can't say it. He's a Nazirite. There's a lot of N words, I just realized. He's a Nazirite. He's supposed to be consecrated. He's supposed to be set apart, holy to the Lord. He is a man who is supposed to be fully devoted to the Lord. And the first thing that we read about Samson is he goes down to Timnah and he sees a daughter of the Philistines, and he goes to his mom and dad and says, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. Now, get her for me as my wife. What? Get her for me as my wife. And Samson goes on to say, get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. Now, that's an interesting phrase. Later in the book, we're going to see all Israel is just doing whatever's right in their own eyes. And that is the opposite of doing whatever God has commanded and following the will of the Lord. So it's interesting that Samson says, I want you to get her for me. She looks good. And mom and dad are not happy. They say, why don't you select an Israelite woman? We're not supposed to be marrying the women from foreign nations. That's something God has commanded us against. So it's kind of, they're upset about this. You're a Nazirite. You're not supposed to be this way. But what we read is even more interesting. In verse 14, it says, his father and mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. And at that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. So what we see is that he is desiring to marry this woman, but at the same time, Either he knows that this is going to work out to where he gets to defeat the Philistines and he's getting an inroad, or God has ordained this and he just has this appetite for Philistine women, which we're going to see later. He does have an appetite for Philistine women. But either way, this is all a part of God's plan. And whenever he goes on his way with his parents to meet this Philistine and to maybe pay the dowry and start the process, on the way, he runs into a lion. And apparently the lion is roaring and coming to attack him, and he goes and he attacks the lion, and he tears the lion to shreds with his bare hands. He doesn't even have a weapon on him. The Spirit of the Lord comes into him, and he has the power to go and shred a lion and tear it up. And the lion dies. And he goes off and doesn't tell his mom and dad what he did. He's not supposed to touch dead animals or anything like that. He's not supposed to touch anything unclean. So again, it's like, whoa, Samson, what are you doing? And then he goes on, he doesn't tell his mom and dad, and he goes and he meets the Philistines. They arrange the marriage. He goes back home, and then he goes again the second time to have his bride and prepare the feast. And on the way, he has to see the lion. He looks inside, he goes aside to see the lion, and in the carcass of the lion that has been dead for a long time now, he sees the bees have made a beehive. And he grabs some of the honey and he takes it to his mom and dad and he shares it with them, and they're all just eating and enjoying their honey. And it says he never tells them where the honey came from. So there's like things that are like alarms going off, like, Samson, dude, what is going on in your mind? Why are you doing this? It's you're compromising. What you're doing is contradictory. You're a Nazirite. You're not supposed to do those types of things. But he does. And he goes and it begins the marriage feast, and the Philistines bring some of their own people, 30 of their own people. He makes a wager with them. He says, if you can answer this riddle, then I'll give you 30 pieces of clothing. And if you can't answer it, then you give me 30 pieces of clothing. They say, okay, we'll agree to that. What's the riddle? Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Obviously referring to the lion and the honey. Well, the Philistines try for 3 days to figure it out. They can't understand the riddle, so they go to his would-be wife and they convince her to betray Samson. And she does. And on the seventh day, they tell him what's sweeter than honey and what's stronger than a lion. So they have the answer. So Samson goes into their town and kills 30 men and takes their clothes and gives it to them. Well, that's odd. But after this happens, he knows that his wife has betrayed him. So he leaves his wife and he goes on back home without really consummating the marriage or anything like that. And then he says, you know what, I need my wife. I'm going to go back up and get my wife. He takes a goat with him, and he finds that her father has given her away to his best man at the wedding. So he came back for his wife and found out that she'd been given to his best man. And this starts a cycle of vengeance. Now Samson gets mad. And he takes some foxes and he ties their tails together. And he ties a torch to their tails and sets it on fire. And he sends those foxes off into their harvests. And it burns up their olive trees. And it burns up their vineyards. It just causes mass chaos and all kinds of suffering for the Philistine people. Well, the Philistines get upset about that. So they go and they find out it was Samson who did it. And they kill his wife and her family. Well, Samson gets upset about that. So he goes out and he fights the Philistines and he strikes them hip and thigh. So he basically disables them and causes them to have a lot of suffering in this fight. And he hurts a lot of them. Well, the Philistines get upset about that. And so they come down into Judah where Samson's hiding, and they tell the men of Judah, and there's 3,000 of them, they say, give us Samson. And Judah says, well, we don't want any trouble. We don't want any trouble. Please don't do anything against us. And so they say, give us Samson. And they go to Samson and they say, Samson, you got to come with us. We got to give you to the Philistines. Don't you know that they rule over us? And it's interesting that in this part of the story, you see that Samson has rebelled against the Philistines, and all Israel's like, you can't do that, Samson. They're not crying out to God. They're not fighting back. They're basically submitting to the reality that they are going to be under the rule of the Philistines forever, even though they have Samson. Well, Samson says, just swear that you won't kill me, and I'll go with you. And they tie him with new ropes, and they take him out to meet all of these Philistines that have come. And as he gets to the Philistines, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. And he breaks the new ropes, and he grabs a donkey jaw, a skeleton of a donkey, his jaw. And he takes it, and he fights, and he kills 1,000 Philistines with a donkey's jaw. Wow. And after this happens, he gives credit to God. He points out that God is the one who has done this for him, and he's thirsty. And he says, God, you've granted me this great salvation by the hand of your servant. Now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? And God splits open a place, and water comes out from it. So we have a rock being split and water coming out to provide for Samson. And that ends the vengeance cycle of Samson. Samson has victory over the Philistines. And then at the end of this chapter, we read that he goes on to judge Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So if the story ended there, we'd be like, wow, Samson, you're great. You did great. There was some weird stuff at the beginning, but overall, amazing. Like, I can't believe you killed 1,000 with a donkey's jawbone. That's impressive. But in chapter 16, we find that appetite that he has for Philistine women comes back again. And he goes down into the Philistine city of Gaza, and he finds a prostitute by the name of Delilah. And as he's with Delilah, he loses sense of the work that God has for him. He loses sense of God consecrating him and setting him apart, just like he had done, it seemed, with the lion and everything with the Philistines. It seems like there was something up with all that. Like he didn't have this understanding. You're supposed to be better than that, Samson. And as he's there with Delilah, the Philistines come and they try to convince Delilah to betray Samson. Find his secret. Find his weakness. We need to get him and we need to capture him. And Delilah asks, what's your secret? And Samson tells her it's this. And she's like, okay, so she does that. And then the Philistines are coming and Samson breaks it and it's not a big deal. Does it again, breaks it, not a big deal. Does it again. And this time Samson opens up his heart and tells Delilah the truth. And Delilah's crying and Samson's in love with her. And he reveals to her that he is a Nazirite and that his hair is a symbol of his relationship with God, and that through that hair he has the great strength from God given to him. So Delilah, while he's sleeping, cuts off his hair. When he wakes up at the sound of her saying, the Philistines are coming, he finds that he's unable to stop them. And instead of being able to stop the Philistines, he is caught by them and they gouge out his eyes. And he can't do anything to stop them. And the Philistines are enjoying their success. They're using Samson as a prop at all their parties. And they have this huge feast where they're going to honor their god, Dagon. And they say, let's bring Samson out here. And they've got a young man carrying chains to pull Samson out there. They don't need much because he's lost his strength. He's lost his relationship with God. God is not fighting for him. The Spirit of the Lord is not upon him. So a young man can pull him and drag him around. And they all make a big show of him. And they pick on him and they mock him. And they show how great their god, Dagon, is. But Samson asks to lean against two pillars that are holding up this huge infrastructure where thousands of people are contained. And it says his hair has grown back a little bit. And he prays to God and he asks God to just give him strength for this one time. And God does. God listens to him as he looks to God again. And he pushes on the pillars and brings down the whole structure on top of the Philistines. And it says he killed more Philistines on that day than he had killed in all his life. And this is the story of Samson. Now let's talk about this a little bit. There's some fascinating stuff about this book, but really the overall message is important. As we think about strength and we think about weakness, we know we all have those. We have strengths, we have weaknesses. What are we learning about strengths and weaknesses throughout the Judges? We see these men, they're obviously flawed, but they have great strength. They have great abilities as well. Well, notice and think about how Gideon, Jephthah, and Samson are all men of faith. Gideon with his 300, Jephthah going out against the Ammonites, and then Samson and his willingness to fight against those who are Philistines. But at the same time, these men are reckless, they're impulsive, and they're driven by selfish desires, like all of us are. They're both strong and weak. As we look at these men, we're learning that their leadership is flawed. And the people who are under their leadership are getting worse and worse. So what does that mean? Here we have the strongest man maybe to have ever lived, and he's not the deliverer that really fixes the problem. He doesn't bring about a transformation of the people. What we've been seeing since the beginning of the Bible and all these stories is that God's people are continually turning to sin and not trusting in God. And these men, in all their strengths and all their abilities and in all their weaknesses, are unable to bring about a transformation within the hearts of God's people. So physical strength without spiritual purity is not enough. It's not enough. Think about how often we focus on physical strength. Think about how often we focus on being really smart or being really gifted at this or that. Do we understand that there needs to be spiritual purity also? Like, do we hold that in enough value? I think this is kind of showing us that our tendency is to value the strength and to ignore the physical impurity or the spiritual impurity. Whenever we see those spiritual flaws in people, we like to overlook those things. We like to act like that's not as big a deal, or we like to justify those things. We justify them in those we look up to, and we justify them especially in ourselves. But that doesn't fix the problem. If it does, it's a temporary fix. Long term, there's issues. It's interesting, the judges before Gideon all judged Israel for 40 years. 40 years of peace. But then again, the people went back to sinning after they died. These men judge Israel for 6 years, 8 years, and then 20 years. But then again, all Israel goes right back to sinning after they die. These judges and men who have these weaknesses are not enough. We need something more. We need someone who's better than them to lead us. That's what Judges is telling us. We need the ultimate deliverer. And New Testament Jews, as we come to the New Testament, they weren't looking for the ultimate deliverer. They were looking for another Samson. That's what they were wanting. They were wanting somebody who was super strong, who's going to go out there and defeat all the Romans and allow Israel to enjoy the physical land again. And they didn't care about spiritual impurity because they were lifting up leaders that were liars and cheaters and idolaters and manipulators and doing all kinds of wicked things. They didn't care about that. They just wanted somebody who looked the part and seemed strong enough to go and defeat their enemies. But God gives them a new Samson that's beyond their expectations. And whenever we look at the life of Jesus, we see some parallels. Like Samson, Jesus' birth was announced before he was even conceived. Like Samson, he was set apart by God from the beginning, that he was going to be God's deliverer. And like Samson, he was betrayed and given into the hands of his enemies. Those are the similarities, but that's really all the similarities. Because the contrasts are what make it so fascinating. You see, Jesus was not like Samson, because Jesus resisted every temptation that was thrown his way. He never did what was right in his own eyes. That wasn't his focus. His focus was to do what was right in the Father's eyes. Jesus gave himself instead of seeking vengeance and entering into a vengeance cycle with his enemies. He gave himself willingly to his enemies in order to save them. And Jesus never lost sight. He never lost track of where his strength came from. He maintained a spiritual strength that was greater than any physical strength any man could ever possess. I find it fascinating as we think about Samson and all of his strength, to compare him to Jesus and see we don't want a Samson. Not really. We want a Jesus. That's what we want. You see, the strongest man in Israel couldn't save himself. He couldn't do anything to save himself. But Jesus, he saves everyone who submits to him. So, the message of Samson is not be real strong like Samson, but the message is you need an even stronger deliverer. And that's what Jesus is, and that's who he is. So, turn to God and receive his strength. Let him be the one who provides you with the strength that you need, not to defeat your enemies, but to endure the trials and the sufferings that this life will bring. If there's anybody here this evening who needs to give your life to God and receive the strength, receive renewal, spiritual purity can be yours through the sacrifice of Jesus. If you're willing to trust in him and not trust in your own strength, he will fill you with everything you need. He will deliver you from sin and death. Please come as we stand and as we sing.